Hello, everybody. I'm really thrilled to have world champion Allan Terhune join us as we kick off what is our second season of Sailfaster. As many of you know, Allan is a highly experienced sailmaker and racer. He's a multi-year finalist for Rolex Yachtsman of the Year, I think including last year as well, right? 2023?
Yeah, last year as well, yeah.
And I think, Allan, you have 11 North American Championship wins in Lightnings and Flying Scots and Thistles, and you're the J22 World Champion, or you were
Yeah.
in.
I was in whatever it was, 2013 or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
super impressive. And I, I did see that last year was a massive year for you, right? You were the Scow class champion, a 6 meter world champion as tactician,
Yeah.
and a gold medal in the Lightning class at the Pan American Games in
Yeah.
Chile. I think that was.
Yep. It was a really good year. Can't complain about that for sure.
I was going to say that sounded like an incredibly disappointing, disappointing year for you.
Yeah, it was really bad. And that was fun. Really fun.
What were the goals? If I can ask, what were the goals that you set yourself for last year? Then,
Uh Interesting. I mean, honestly, it was more of just trying to do projects that were fun. I had not sailed 6 meters before, and doing the Pan Am Games was something I'd always wanted to do. It was kind of to do fun projects, do things that were, sparked interest and got, motivated to do and just were something I was looking forward to do. So I think that was kind of the biggest priority for the year was just finding fun, exciting projects to do.
yeah, it sounded like it was. You had a dreadful time doing that.
Yeah,
I'm so envious.
it was terrible. Yeah, let me tell you, no, it was super fun. Yeah,
So we're going to, in the next 45 minutes. We're going to talk about your philosophy around focus and simplicity.
yeah,
You and I talked a few days ago in prep for this about the 95% rule. I thought was interesting,
yeah,
and then I'd love to spend quite a lot of time on how to make good decisions as you approach gate marks. That was something
yeah,
that sparked
yeah,
something in you. I know there's so many things we could talk about. I know you've
sure,
done this a lot. You've been interviewed a lot, but I thought those would be super interesting for our Sailfaster listeners.
perfect.
But before we get going,
Yeah.
can you tell us about how did it all begin for you?
Yeah. I mean, my whole family has been sailing since I've been growing up. And, obviously, I grew up in New Jersey. I'm not a native Annapolitan. So sailing is just part of the culture there. And my dad was really big into it and sailed with him on his J29 and other boats. And we didn't have Opties when I grew up. So we had a little local pram that we all used to sail. And then there wasn't 420s yet at that stage either. So, we raced Blue Jays and other boats. There was definitely a bigger priority of sailing with adults and sailing with bigger boats when you had the chance when I was younger. So did a lot of crewing on different boats and sailing with, older folks at the club was kind of the best way to gain experience. So it was a lot of sailing, but it may be kind of different than the way it is now where, junior sailing there was a little more structured on doing some of your own sailing, but sailing with other people. So it was pretty good. Definitely a different, definitely a little bit different than it is, say, now or in other places.
At what point did you realize there was a sort of professional career in it for you?
Never. I mean, I don't necessarily think of it as work even still, but I don't know. I guess it came kind of later. I went to college at the Merchant Marine Academy in New York, and spent a few years doing other, maritime related work. Worked at the Port of Philadelphia for a while, and then after that, got a job actually coaching at the Naval Academy for a little bit, and then got pulled into working at North Sales probably in 2006 or seven, something like that, and then it's kind of gone from there. So it's kind of been a whirlwind of getting here, but it's been good. Really
Yeah, I
good.
was going to ask you about the North Sales thing. I saw that you
Yeah,
you spent time at North Sales and you spent
yeah,
time at Quantum Sales
yeah,
and then back to North Sales. Was there
yeah.
what are the differences in design philosophy or operational philosophy did you find between the two sailmakers?
Um, it's definitely different. I mean, I think both companies are obviously successful and have good, dealing with customers and things like that. But I think there's some definite cultural differences in how the companies work inside and kind of how everyone, kind of does things and kind of procedural things. And I think, I'm a little biased, having been back here and been here for a while. I mean, I think the 3DI product is definitely something that's quite special and sets North apart. And the design team is really conscious about making sure that we have the best sales all the time. And that's something I really get excited about. So
Mm.
it's good. It's been, both places where, obviously I've been here a long time, and my time there was great as well. I wouldn't really trade it for anything. I think it was definitely a good experience and worth doing. So it was good all around, basically.
Yeah, yeah, no, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Tell us about what was the last regatta you raced in? The most recent race or
Actually, the
regatta?
most recent race, well, other than Thursday night sailing, we did the Helly Hansen. I crewed for my wife at the Helly Hansen Regatta here in Annapolis on the
Oh
J70.
yeah,
It was
yeah.
good.
What were
Yeah.
you on?
Uh,
What boat were you on? What?
Sailed on her J70, and we
Hmm.
were fortunate enough to win the event. It was
Wow.
fun. Kind of a new team coming together, and she's done a lot of J70 racing in the last couple of years and has a very successful program. So it was fun to be invited to hop on her boat with her and do it. And yeah, it was really good. Sail with Dave Hughes, who I sail with a lot, and 6 meters and the J24 and some other stuff. And Colin Kirby sail with us, who's local pro in town here, is really talented. I'm sure you've met him going through
Hmm.
some things here in Annapolis, but it was good. It was a really fun team, and the event was fun. It was cold. I'm sure you remember being out there. It was not the night. Friday was great, but Saturday and Sunday weren't the nicest days. But there was wind, so we'll take it for around here for sure.
I seem to remember. I think we did 2 out of 3. I think the third day we didn't go because it was pretty
It
miserable.
was
But it was a great
miserable
event,
outside.
though.
It was,
Yeah,
yeah.
great event.
They did a good job organizing it. The parties were good. It was cold, but sailing was good. So
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
definitely take it.
It's great stuff. The
Yeah,
bay was packed with boats and fleets. It was
boats
wonderful.
everywhere. Yeah, it's really
Yeah,
good. It's always. I think it's like the best weekend of the year. It's like the beginning of summer here in Annapolis when that regatta happens. So I think it's
yeah,
fun. Yeah.
yeah. Hey, when we chatted a couple of weeks ago now, you had these interesting thoughts about simplicity,
Yeah.
about focusing on simplicity
Yeah.
as a philosophy of yours. So
Yeah.
can you talk about what does that mean to you? What does it mean you do differently, if anything? And I suppose it probably means focusing on the things that really matter.
Yeah.
And so what's that all about for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the sport's super complex, right? I mean, there's so many moving parts and pieces, and I think it's just eliminating as many variables as you can and kind of making it so that you're focused on the big things that matter, And it's like, you and I chat a little bit about this. It cracks me up when people are talking about a half a turn of tuning here or there, and it's like, well, if you're not even trimming the main sheet and the jib sheet right, who cares if your lowers are half a turn too tight or just little things and, being prepared and, stuff like that kind of gets in the way of, blinding everyone to the too many small details kind of make background noise, which I think is a problem. I think it's just focusing on, one thing at a time, getting a good start or, one of the things we usually talk about on the boat, is just, we're focused on what's next at hand, to start. And it's like, we're worried about that first. And then once we get going, then we'll worry about the beat. And then we'll worry about the next thing. It's pretty easy to get overwhelmed when you start thinking about the entire race at the beginning. It's pretty easy to kind of lose sight of what's really going on, which is the immediate, what needs to be done. So just,
Yeah, you can get really lost in the details, can't you? And
you can.
you
Yep.
talk to lots of sailors and racing sailors, and they'll have a particular ingredient or detail about how tackline should always be 3 inches above the sprit or
Right.
6 inches above the sprit. And I did find myself thinking about, should I get one of those low friction rings for
Yeah.
where the tackline goes at the front of the sprit?
Yeah.
Or should I just keep the block that I've got on now? And I was thinking, this is insane. It's not going to make any difference at all. If I, to your point about, if I don't have the chute trimmed correctly,
Who
it
cares?
doesn't matter a damn what kind of
Right. I
ball
mean,
forward.
do all these little details add up? They do, I'm not trying to diminish that. Yes, you should do everything you can to optimize your boat and do all these things. But again, I think it's pretty easy to get, you know, you get wrapped up in a little detail that just doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things if you're not doing the other stuff right. And I think that's kind of the big thing is, something we had talked about a little bit. It's like, you got to focus on making sure that everything is, the bigger items are right first before you worry about the other stuff. It's like I get this, oh, we're not doing well, our tuning's off, and then you watch the races and this, the starts are just atrocious. It's like, well, you can have all the tuning you want. It's not going to help you if you can't do this or you can't get the kite up and down. It really doesn't matter. So
Yeah.
it's kind of developing these, skills and, the big picture, I guess the bigger, items have to be right before you can worry about the little details. And I think that's where, a lot of sailors get caught because they're worrying about the little details and the foundation isn't there, so to speak.
Do you find when you're sailing with clients that you have to sort of push them towards that? Like, don't worry about that. Focus on the
Yeah,
big
I mean,
things.
yeah, I mean, I think all these programs, and if you talk to any of the, you got to build from the bottom up, right? It's you have to, you don't build a house starting with the roof. You build with the foundation first, and it's like you have to be able to tack and jibe and get the sails up and down and do the basic things before you can worry about all the other stuff. And I think that's where people get ahead of themselves. Is they're so worried about tuning or, you know, I have to wet sand my bottom from 800 to 1,000, but it's like, again, if you're not doing the other stuff right, it's not going to solve your problems, so to speak. So I think that's the
Yeah,
big thing. Yeah.
I understand that. I mean, we made a marked improvement this year by buying Velocitech, pinging the starts, doing practice starts,
Yeah.
and so now we start quite well. You know,
Yeah.
quite we never win the
Yeah.
start anywhere near that, but
Yeah.
we're not back in the second row anymore. We're sort of
Yeah.
maybe between the first row and second row, but what, so you feel like, hey, that was a really good start, and then you've got the next problem is how do you hold the lane, and
Sure.
then okay, we're holding the lane quite well, and how do you make decisions
But
about shit? So
but
it is about
you can't worry about holding your lane if you never get off the line, right? So like I think you're proving the point. It's one step at a time. Is focusing on what you can do to build to those next pieces, right?
yeah.
It's I think that's the key to all of it.
Yeah, and you talked about the 95% rule, and I may have sort of
Yeah.
jumped
Yeah.
on that as something
Yeah.
interesting to talk about. That notion of look, it's relatively easy to get 90 to sort of 95% of
Yeah.
100 being the optimal top sailor.
Yeah.
The hard thing is eking out that last 5%.
Right.
So presumably the last 5% is when the tuning matters, whether you
Sure.
have a low friction ring or a block, those sorts of things matter.
Exactly. But it's as I say, it's you got to get your steering the boat right, trimming the main and jib right. The big lines. It's like I said to you before. It cracks me up when people are talking about I get this question. Well, where should my Cunningham be at this stage? And it's like, well, if your traveler and your main sheet and your backstay aren't set right, it really doesn't matter how hard you pull the Cunningham on, right? It's like that you got to get to the big controls and big situations first before you worry about the little details. And that's what I'm saying. If you can get to the 95%, which is, main sheet, jib sheet, getting reasonable starts, kind of executing your plan kind of well, then it's pretty, you're going to get reasonable results pretty quickly. And then it's
Yeah.
like, okay, then how do you get from the reasonable results to top level results? And that's the hard part, right? It's the last little bit is usually the hardest. But I think the thing is people tend to focus on the last little bit before they get the base, station to kind of build off of.
So when you jump on a client's boat, say they've got a new North Main,
Yeah.
typically, what are the things they can do to improve their program? I'm not saying this very well, so let me
Yeah.
start that again.
No.
So let me try this again then. So typically, Alan, when you jump on a client's boat, what are the things that you immediately can see that they could improve on, which would somewhat dramatically shift their performance?
Yeah.
Is
I
it
mean,
always the same things?
no, not no. And I think the one thing that's really crucial is when you hop on a boat for the first time is kind of being observant and watching what's going on. I think the worst thing that happens is you get on the boat and you just say, "Oh, well, here's what you got to do." And it's like you really got to let people sail a little bit, see how it all goes, watch what they're doing, and then kind of build off of what you can see they're already doing to kind of grow. I think it's kind of interesting to see. You see the people who help that just jump on the boat before they even leave the dock. They're already saying, "We need to change this, do this, do this, do this." And it's like I think that's a pretty big mistake. You got to put the time in, get on the boat, watch the team sail, kind of see where it's going, kind of you know build a I don't know if you'd call it, but like build a vision of what's happening, and then kind of help make a direction from there. Right? what's the saying? It's hard to know where you're going if you don't know where you're starting from. It's kind of that thing. It's like it I don't want to say it makes me laugh, but it kind of, I chuckle every time you get on the boat and you see a new person hop on. They're like, "Oh, you're doing this wrong." It's like, well, how do you know? You haven't been here. Maybe we do this for a reason, type thing. So, I think it's the approach of, if you really want to help teams get better, you got to get on the boat, you got to watch them, see what they do, and then kind of build from there. And you may find out, it's crazy. Even people like me learn stuff when you go sailing with people. I mean, it's amazing how many times you hop on, go sailing J105 on Wednesday night or something. You learn something new from other people all the time, and that's kind of the building block. So, back to your question, is how do you help people? I think the first thing is you have to learn where they are and kind of see what's going on and kind of help see what the issues are before you can help kind of develop a plan to go forward. I think the biggest kind of compromise is folks hop on the boat with a predetermined plan of how to make this boat better, and it's not necessarily right, if that makes any sense.
So I'm going to edit this next bit out because I'm really interested in that, because I love what you're saying, because sometimes on Wednesday nights I'll have some of the pro sailmakers, others, coaches, jump on the boat for a Wednesday night race because that's what they can do. And what I want from them is help me get better. It's that, you don't give somebody a fish, you teach them to fish, sort of thing. Because what I find them doing is jumping all of the boats because they're determined to win. They're just tuned into not winning, but getting a good result for you. So they're running backwards and forwards. I'm thinking, no, don't. Can you tell our jib guy how to do that? Don't do it yourself. I need him to learn. And what happens is you might get a decent result, but then they jump off the boat, and I don't know if we took anything away from that. I need somebody to be able to look at the sails, and like when we were racing on Saturday, we started to go really slow, and I realized we're out of trim here. We were doing great, and we're out of trim. The boat is slowing down, and I needed somebody to be able to look at it and go, "Oh, I can see this is what's happening," and tell us, you've got the draft too far forward, or I think what we were doing, we were using a jib, and it was choking off the jib was in too tight, so choking off the main. We fixed it, but I think just reflecting on your thought about, I'd love to somebody comes on the boat and just observes and then tries to pass that knowledge on to us, tries to teach us rather than sort of tell us. Anyway.
I mean, it's a different situation, right? I mean, if you're at a world championship, you're not trying to do that, right? I mean, you're trying to win, right? At that point, this is kind of like in the question of preparation. Yeah. You hopefully before you've gotten to the big regatta, you're beyond this part of the conversation, right? But as you're building it out and you're starting to get help or trying to get better, the first step is you have to identify where you are and then kind of figure out the key, as you're saying, trigger points to figure out what's going on. And I think that's what you're saying. Yep.
So one thing I think I've seen from your experience and from being interviewed before is that your preference right now is for the smaller dinghy style boats, a more simplicity boat. Is that true or not?
I mean, not necessarily. I mean, I'm leaving tomorrow to go to New York Yacht Club for the annual regatta, and sailing on a boat that we're getting ready to do the ORC Worlds, and I do the MAC race, Chicago MAC race, with my in-laws on their family boat. This will be the second or third time I've done it with them. So I try and do a bunch of stuff. It was just last year was more smaller boats. It just kind of varies.
It was what was coming.
Yeah, just kind of what was coming. But, we're doing a big, it's a, whatever it is, 40-foot boat this weekend coming up. So,
what's your, what event do you really look forward to?
Coming up or in the past or?
Yeah, coming up. Yeah.
I mean, this year, I think we're doing the ORC, kind of circuit in Newport on this 1198, which is fun, and going to do some J70 sailing with Kate again. The MC Scow regattas are coming up, and I like that because it's single-handed, and all my buddies from junior sailing days all have them, and we all go to the regattas and drink beers and have a good time. So that's fun too. So I don't know. There's not too much of it I don't look forward to. I like racing Wednesday nights here too. It's all fun. So I mean, it's going to be a pretty good season coming up, I think. So
the 1198, that's an Italian boat, right? Is that right?
Yep, exactly.
Yeah.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The new wave of Italian boats.
Exactly. Yeah.
How do you think about your personal preparation for
Yep.
a regatta or a single race, whether it's coastal, offshore, long distance? Do you have a checklist that you go through in your mind?
Um, yeah, I mean, I do. I mean, I think for me, it's always having, the boat should be, prepared and ready to go. And, um, I definitely like to just to know, be comfortable that the boat's ready and, have good weather intel and things like that. I think the one thing for me is I'm not a big believer in, how do I put this? I don't like the term I say is festering. Like I hate just standing around and wasting time. So like I'm a full believer. It's a kind of an interesting topic because it's like, I've heard this discussion before. Like I'm never a believer that if you're prepared and you have your schedule, like you set your schedule to get to the race course when you need to get there, and you get to the boat and you do what you got to do and you go, right? I'm not a big believer in, if the race starts at 11, getting to the dock at 7:30 in the morning and standing around and twiddling my thumbs for 3 hours just so we can say we're the first ones at the dock and doing all that stuff. That's just not in my vocabulary. So, I would, if I'm ready to go, I get up, I grab my stuff. We know what time we're going to be there. We get to the boat, we do our stuff, and we go. Like it's not a stand around stuff. And the same thing is when you're done at the end of the day, it's like you have your debrief and you move on, and there has to be on and off switches for it. That's when you're prepared. It's when it's a lingering, if you're doing boat work or it's just all these days start turning long and running together, that's when you're actually a little bit unprepared, right? It's kind of interesting to me. Like the top teams are the ones that at the day is over, they fold the sails up, they do a little bit of their boat work and they're gone, right? And then in the morning they show up, they get dressed, they get on the boat and they go. Those are the ones that kind of show to me that they're like prepared and not the ones that are, at the dock doing boat work or redoing stuff over and over again. I kind of view that as you're actually slightly unprepared, if that makes any sense. So I think a lot of it is just getting stuff done ahead of time and making sure the boat is right. I think that's the big thing. And I think for me, my biggest pet peeve is just stuff on the boat not working. I just want to be able to, if there's a control on the boat, it should be able to be adjusted or work. And you shouldn't have to worry about stuff breaking. I think that's when sailing actually becomes unfun, right? I mean, how many times you've been on the boat, something breaks, it gets pretty frustrating, right? And it's like, you can deal with not sailing well and losing a race. It's just a bummer when you lose a race because the boat broke. It's just kind of a bummer. So that's a big pet peeve for me, but it is what it is, I guess.
Do you ever? Some sailors do that visualization technique in terms of the day before, the 2 days before, or even the night before, starting to just think through that. You're obviously
Yeah.
familiar with that. Do you practice that?
Yeah. Not really. I mean, I think for me, it's more of just, I'm a big kind of, if I can not think about it, I'm probably better off. So, I kind of will, check the weather or do things, but, like the night before, you read your sailing instructions and check the weather. And then if everything on the boat is right, I try and just turn it off and not think about it. I mean, it's kind of I think it's easy to get worked up and kind of overthink stuff, if that makes any sense,
Yeah,
Sometimes
yeah. No, it does. It's
you
interesting.
just got to
Yeah.
kind of just do what you know how to do and not stress about it a little bit.
Oh, it's
Yeah.
obviously second nature to you, right? So it's
No, I don't even know if it's that. It's just I think it's one of these things that you can become, what is it, like paralysis by analysis? Like you can overthink this stuff to death, and I think that kind of goes back to your original point of just keeping it simple, right? I mean, if you don't, it's just too hard to kind of. I mean, you could sit there and literally overanalyze any part of a race over and over and over again. And it'll drive yourself nuts. And there's just stuff you can't deal with. I mean, there's just things you can't do. I mean, it is what it is. So, yeah, maybe it's older age for me because I used to think about it more, but I think it becomes easy to just blow your head up if you just keep thinking about it over and over and over and over again. So, yeah, I mean,
I'm actually on the other end. I'm thinking about it afterwards. Like, why the hell did we go that way rather than that way? But
well, I do think afterwards it is important to kind of, and this is, is, I don't want to say relive it, but kind of go through these situations where if there was an issue, to think it through and kind of play it back in your head. I think that is actually really good because I know for me that's how I don't make those mistakes again, right? I mean, it's kind of learning from the stuff you did and making sure that it doesn't, you don't do it over and over and over again is kind of the big one. So I actually think the replay after doing that is kind of more, I don't I won't say beneficial, if you're doing it the right way, than kind of forward thinking about what's going to be, and you just don't know. I mean, you never know what the next day is going to bring on the water. I mean, we can look at forecasts and all this stuff, and I mean, how many times have we seen a forecast? You get there, it's not even close to what it was. So, I'd probably more of a replay, kind of figure out what it is, learn what I need to learn, and then shut the sailing computer off for a while and do something else. So,
yeah, no, I get it.
Yeah.
Hey, could we just go back to the 95% idea, because I love this, and I know it was conceptual. It was something you threw out there,
I
but
mean, yeah.
Say you get to 95%, say we're at 95%, right? Which presumably means, hey, we start well, we hold lanes, we make good decisions, we, tack on the shifts and good mark roundings. Yeah. Once you're there, and by the way, when my team is not there, but once you're there, to get to the sort of 96, 97, 98, which gets increasingly hard, are there typically things you see the top teams doing that separate them from the rest?
So it's interesting, when I was sailing stars, this is kind of where this came from, is when I started sailing the boat, everyone's like, you know what, just get the tuning guide, follow the tuning guide, get the basic set of sails, and you're going to get to this 95% level pretty quickly. And I was like, yeah, did that. And it's like, and the word of advice was, as soon as you start thinking you can go faster, you actually run the risk of going slower for a little bit until you figure it out. And it was kind of interesting. So we did this, and we were doing okay, and then we started messing with tuning and really getting down. Oh, we think we can make the boat even faster if we do this, and we ended up. The boat got harder, and we kept making mistakes and learning things. And it was like it went up, and then kind of went down, and then went back up. And I think that's kind of the one thing is things like tuning guides, right? It gets the boat close enough. They call it a guide for a reason. It's not the end all be all, but it's the goal is to get you so you're at this competitive level to make adjustments, right? And it's like, it's funny, you see boats that aren't even close to the guide, and then they're like, well, we're slow. It's like, well, if you get to this, you can get close enough, right? And it's like, it gets to the okay, now you're at the tuning guide, but the main doesn't look right. It's like, well, okay, need to trim the main sheet on and ease the traveler a little bit. Hold on one second. Sorry, I messed this up. Hold on. Sorry, Celeste, I'm on the phone.
That's fine.
Sorry about that. So now where was I?
You're talking about tuning guide. You got the
and it's like, so you get the tuning guide, and it's like, but if the main sheet's not right, you just got to kind of build this again, like we're talking about the foundation of getting the basic part of the boat to go. I think it's interesting when you get most of these boats, like you hop on a client's boat, you get the boat kind of close to the tuning guide, you trim the sheets. I'm not talking about all the details right, and you get a reasonable start. All of a sudden, they're like, oh, we're competitive with the boats that they think are faster. And it's like, yeah, they're not doing anything crazy. They're just getting their mast reasonably set up. They're trimming their sails reasonably correct, and they're getting reasonable starts. And they're not doing anything that's like earth shattering yet, right? It's and for 95% of the time, it's like we're saying, it's good enough. You're going to go win races. And it's like, yeah, do you need to do the 2-boat testing and get them lined up and worry about the half a turn on the lowers? Yeah, sure. If you're trying to win a Worlds and there's a 4-mile windward leg or something like that, and you got to get the boat to be a tenth of a knot faster, yeah, okay, yeah, that's going to get you there. But for the majority of stuff that the majority of people do, it's just, I think we make it too complicated, would be my 2 cents. So,
yeah, interesting. Okay, I want to talk about, I'll edit this bit out. I want to talk about the gate decision. I thought it was really interesting.
Yeah.
And on two scenarios. Like, one is you're in the top couple of boats, so you've got lots. That becomes a relatively easy decision. The other thing we talked about, and I'll repeat this as more of a form of question, was about okay, so you're OCS back of the fleet. How do you then work your way up, and then the gate gets crowded? So we had quite a good conversation about that. So can we good about that? If so, I'll put it in form of question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, Allan, what I do want to spend some time is on making good decisions at gates, which is very often, on a modern windward leeward course now, there are gates there. And, you had some great thoughts on this. I want to sort of track through those. The first one was about the scenario is, you've got time and room and you're at the front of the fleet. You can make decisions about which gate to go to. I'd love to talk about that. And then let's talk about that situation when you're OCS, you're working your way through the fleet, the gate is crowded. which
Yeah.
is which is where I am always at.
Yeah.
And then you've got a different set of decisions to make there. So could you sort of compare and contrast those two
Yeah.
situations, please?
Yeah, I mean, the gate is a crucial part of the race. I mean, it only usually, a lot of times we sail these four-legged races, right? So you only do it once a race, and it's kind of like a second start in a way, right? Because you come off the marks, you have to hold a lane for a while, you got to get through traffic before you get to the. So it's kind of like the race is starting a second time, right? You're at the bottom of the course near the starting line. It's almost harder because all the boats are in line versus bow to stern versus side by side. So you really got to execute the turn and holding a lane. I mean, I think that's number one part of gate roundings. Regardless of which one's favored and going the right way, the executing of the turn and getting the boat around the mark and going close hauled and going speed and having your lane open is just the number one thing. And I think a lot of times that gets lost in translation, where everyone's always thinking about which mark to go to and which one here. 9 times out of 10, if you can just execute the actual maneuver, you gain, right? I mean, it's a huge opportunity there. And, knowing when to go high a little bit, if you have enough speed to build a hole so you can go straight or whatever it is. I mean, I think that's a pretty important part of gate roundings, right? It's especially in one design racing where the boats are generally closer, like in the J105 when you're out there. I mean, you get between 5 and the back of the fleet, the gate is crowded all the time. So if you watch the boats that execute getting off the mark and being able to go straight, they make huge gains regardless of the mark. So I think that's, kind of number one. And I think, the second one is,
Well,
really,
before we go to the second one, could I just
yeah,
ask you about
yeah,
when do you start thinking about gates?
yeah.
As soon as you've gone around the top mark, or is
I
it
mean,
halfway
I mean,
down?
yeah, I mean, a little bit because there's some planning to go into it, right? I mean, if you think about it, there's, one of the marks are generally favored upwind and down, right? So it's kind of funny, you talk about, like a starting line. If let's say one end of the line is favored, but it's a boat length up, let's just say the pin end is a boat length to windward, right? Let's just as an example. The problem is with a gate mark, if one mark is out of favor, you have to sail that distance to get to the unfavored mark and then back just to get even to the other one. So it's almost like a double loss, right?
Yeah.
So like if a
Okay.
gate mark is skewed by, let's just say, I don't know, 50 feet, you have to actually do an extra 100 feet to get to the other one because you're going 50 feet past square and then 50 feet back to get back to it. Something
Are
like
you
that.
judging that
I mean,
by?
it's an eyeball judge
Yeah.
most of the time. I mean, if the gates are in the water, you can pre-start. You can get a bearing of the gates and kind of have a rough idea of which one's there. But just remembering. I mean, if they're very unsquare, you lose a lot of distance going to the unsquare mark. So that is one of the things. It's like then it's a trade-off. How much distance are you willing to lose to go to one that might have less traffic, right? I mean, it's a lot of it's a judgment call. I think the one thing a lot of people forget, and I think about quite a bit, is there is 2 sets of ley lines for these marks, right? So there is a part where you can get down the course and kind of get to a point of no return, where if you get too far one side or the other, and you're outside the ley lines of the other mark, you've basically made it a 1 mark rounding, right? Because you've gone outside kind of the cone that puts you, where the marks are, so that basically the other one's not in play anymore. So I think that's a big, I don't want to say it's a mistake, but it's a big thing people forget about. So all of a sudden you go off, you come around the windward mark, you put the kite up, you're on starboard, and all of a sudden you're going. And if you go past the ley line for the left turn, you pretty much lock yourself into a right turn, regardless of what you've done, right? Which may be correct, but you may not be correct. And all of a sudden there's a little shift and you realize, oh man, I want to turn left. And it's too late. Now you're bow up and you're sailing all that extra distance now because you've overstood. No different than overstanding a windward mark. It's kind of the same thing. So I think that's the one of the other things that happens a lot is, we don't pay attention to the ley lines enough and end up overstanding gates.
Okay. So
Yeah.
we're halfway down
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
downwind leg there.
Yeah.
What are the sort of things that, as you're looking at
Yeah.
the gates coming towards you,
Yeah.
what are the sort of things that go in your mind when you start deciding
Yeah.
about which way to
So,
go?
so it's which way I want to go upwind, but I think you're right. Halfway down, you got to start making the decision because you have to kind of prepare for the lead up of how you're going to get to the mark, right? So it's halfway down, you're probably starting to look and say, okay, up the beat, I want to go one way or the other. Where do I think there's more congestion because there's boats on either side? Kind of how do I avoid that? And then you're developing the plan, yeah, halfway out because otherwise it's too late. If you're doing it a third of the way out, generally, I mean, you're probably. I'm not saying you've already picked it and you know you're not locked in at halfway down, obviously, but I think you're starting to develop a plan of what you want to do. I mean, there's a couple things like by default, if I'm all is even in the world and I have no one way or the other that I'm like locked into, I generally try and left turn if I can. With the primary reason that if I have to tack, at least I'm tacking onto starboard and I'll have right away. Whereas if you round the right mark and you go off on starboard and I don't know, another boat is going upwind and you need to tack, now all of a sudden you're on port and you've got issues. So if I have my way, I generally will turn left if I can. But obviously it doesn't work that way. But I think the most important thing is like we started with earlier though, which mark lets you execute the turn and get out of there as quickly as possible. Because I think there's a lot of when you get caught in the pile up or the melee at those marks, and someone goes to even the unfavored mark, but they round clean and go, they generally gain, even if there's an unfavored side to the course and the marks. So yeah, I mean, there's so many factors: current, wind strength, boats, traffic. I mean, it's pretty complex, but I think you have to start, as you said, thinking about it at least halfway down, which is tough.
Yeah, we've been in situations probably like so many people where
Yeah,
you're heading to the left hand gate and then you
yeah,
use the tactician makes the call, we're going to go right, we're going to go right, and that throws everything off, and you then
it does. Yeah,
you as a I tend to be the driver, so I'm starting to think about, hey, where can I thread my way through? What's the
yeah,
opportunity?
yeah.
Do you do you get yourself in those situations, or
You
is that pretty
do.
rare for you?
You do, but I think what happens is if you're the tacticians organized and they communicate well about it. I mean, you're going to know you're in trouble. I don't want to say in trouble, but maybe you know having some thoughts about it. You communicate that to the team. You might say, hey, I'm thinking left right now, but the right could be in play, so just be prepared for either way. Something like that. We're going to be deciding last minute what we're going to do, or some kind of whatever the code word might be about coming in there. Letting the team know, all right, the plan right now is left, but if something goes funny here, we're going to make a right turn. Then everyone knows, okay, well, at least it's on the table. And if it's not, you could say, we're doing a left turn no matter what. It's definite,
Yeah,
final, we're
yeah,
doing it. And that kind of helps the whole team. And I think that's where clear communication of what the expectations are going in kind of helps the whole procedure, right? I mean,
yeah,
it's someone
yeah,
on the boat has to say, yeah, we're doing this and this is the plan, or this is the plan as of now, but it could change. Just be ready in case. And I mean, while that may leave people uneasy, they're more comfortable at least knowing, okay, this could change. So they can at least start thinking about it a little bit and say, if this changes, what do I do? Blah, blah, blah. So, I think a lot of that is communication. It's just saying, yeah, the plan is to go left, but if something goes wrong, just be prepared. If something goes wrong, we're going to audible, something like that. And then at least
yeah,
everyone knows. Whereas it could just
yeah.
be like, we're making a left turn. We're just doing it. That's what we're doing. And then everyone knows, okay, this is the plan. We're sticking to it. So, um,
Yeah, no, that's
communication
good,
is a big
because
part
there's
of it.
probably situations where you do say, no, we're going to go left. We've got plenty of room here. Nobody's around us. We're going to go left. Versus the case when people are converging, like the plan is to go left, but be ready because we might have
Right.
to switch at the
Right.
last minute. We're going to know that in 5 boat
Right.
lengths, sort of
Right.
thing.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Right. And
yeah,
say the call's coming shortly, but just be prepared. We might go right. But I mean, it can be more concise than that, but it shouldn't be that hard to just kind of do it.
yeah.
Yeah.
I think I really find this super interesting. That you talked about this being, it's like a start basically. You can make or break your race by a good gate decision and good rounding, and then the
Yeah.
notion of having a bias towards the left, so that when you tack out, you're coming on starboard, and
Right. I mean, if things go badly, let's just say you end up a lane down, but you have to tack. So now, at least if you're tacking and you need to get out of there, and let's just say a boat had a better rounding behind you, at least you're on starboard, right? So now they
yeah,
might have to duck or
yeah,
tack. If you're going off on starboard, you have a bad rounding, you got to tack to port. Then all of a sudden you're ducking the train of boats. It could just gets worse.
yeah,
So,
yeah,
for me, if I have my way, I try to turn left. I'm not saying I do it all the time, but I would say I probably don't, but I'm saying if I had my way, I would always say if I'm not sure what to do, I'm gonna make a left turn just to kind of
yeah.
keep it that way. Yeah.
Because I suppose if for me, if I'm focusing on what's going on around boats are converging, it's chaotic.
Yeah.
Then if you take the right hand mark and
Yeah.
then when you start looking upwind again, then you suddenly see all these boats coming down. Like shit, we're stuck here on
Yeah.
starboard there. Versus the other way, it doesn't really matter about what traffic's coming down because if you're tacking onto starboard, you have rights anyway. So it's
Right.
you've got less to sort of worry about, which I like
Yeah.
that sort of philosophy.
Yeah.
Hey, one more thing that
Mm-hmm.
you and I briefly touched on. I've had a couple of questions. People send me
Yep. Yep.
questions, email me with questions they'd like me to ask, and I've had a couple now about how do you recover from an OCS? How
Yep.
do you work your way back through
Yep.
the bottom of the fleet
Mm-hmm.
and the mid fleet?
Yep.
And you and I talked about this very briefly the other day. So
Yep.
take us to that scenario, right? Your
Yeah.
OCS, you're turning
I mean,
around, coming back.
yep. Actually, interesting. I had this scenario at MC Regatta a couple weeks ago, and it's a I think the one thing that happens is panic levels go up, right? And I think it's a discipline of being able to stick to what you think your plan was and then just kind of working your way through it bits at a time. And I think the one thing to remember, just philosophically right away is, your first goal is always to close distance, right? It's like, everyone's like, we were over early, but by the first mark, we didn't pass anybody. And it's like, well, who really cares if you passed anybody? If you went from being 200 yards behind to you were overlapped with the last boat at the next mark, that's a gain, right? You've caught back up to the pack, and it's like how each leg you can kind of keep closing the distance to the front is really the goal, right? And I think realizing you're not going to get the whole fleet back at once, and just kind of slowly, methodically taking your sailing the race just like you would if you were in the front, hitting your shifts, managing your lanes, doing all these things. I think that the trick then is as you get into the bottom and middle of the fleet and even back towards the top of the fleet is, your traffic management becomes more important, where, it's kind of funny. Everyone's like, oh, when you're in the front, it looks so easy. It's like, well, it is a lot easier if you're in the first three boats and you don't have to duck or tack anybody. There's no lanes to worry about. You have clear all the time. Yeah, it is a little bit easier. You just kind of go, right? If you watch, they tack once a beat or twice a beat and they just sail. Whereas in the back, you may tack 6 or 7 times because you need clear air, right? So I think it's, just sticking to the basics of managing your, lanes and doing things. And I think, not taking the flyer until you realize there's an opportunity to actually make a, substantial gain and risk the risk reward of, ending the race right there. If you're over and take a flyer to a corner and the corner's wrong, the race is over. I mean, you've now gone from being far behind to further behind, and that's it. So I think the whole goal is just, again, sticking to, like you were saying, the basics, keep your boat speed up, keep your lanes clear, and just kind of slowly get your way through. And then, find your opportunities to kind of gain your way through. So I think that's the key.
Yeah.
It's a mindset of just slowly chipping at it and closing distance versus I got to get it all back right now or the race is over. I think it's really hard to do that. It's impossible, really.
So it's trying to sort of minimize losses at that point then.
I mean, you're minimizing losses and realizing, I mean, look, it's a pretty rare case that you're over early and you win a race, right? I mean, it doesn't happen. Your goal then is to turn a tragic score potentially into, like they say, you just need a keeper, right? And you need a race that's not going to, blow the whole thing up. So it's just a matter of turning that into a score that you walk away from and go, yeah, we sailed a good race and we got, we were over, but we got, whatever it is, and just kind of making these slow gains through the fleet and not panicking and not making rash decisions over this. I mean, I think that's the
yeah. No, I hear you saying you don't throw out the game plan.
No.
You just try and execute it in the same way, and notwithstanding the traffic.
Yeah, and it's interesting. You talk about game plan. You and I talked about that a little bit. It's kind of funny because I think a lot of people, you can talk to. I hop on boats all the time. With teams that are struggling, and they're like, we never know which way to go and do all these things. And we talk to them. Most people can figure out kind of, well, the current's going this way. I see more wind over here. I kind of want to go to this side of the course. I think all of it, most people And again, I think understand how to make the game plan, right? I think the biggest issue with sailing is the execution of said game plan, and how many times like a start goes bad and a lane falls apart, and then all of a sudden, I've seen this a million times. Oh, the whole goal is to start, and we're going to work the left side of the course. They get a bad start, they get flushed out, they tack, they duck a couple boats, then they're on port, and they're like, oh, we got a clean lane. Let's just keep going. It's like, well, why are we to keep going all the way to the right side? The whole talk pre-race was to go to the left. Let's find a way to get back to our play and get back to the left, right? You may go up and tack, and now, yeah, you're further right than maybe you wanted to be, but you're still going towards the favorite side of the course, right? And it's amazing to see how many times people just throw those plans out the window because one little bump in the road threw them off the path, right? So it's kind of a crazy situation. So,
but it's understandable, isn't it? Because if you can't hold a lane, your tactician is telling you, we got to tack. And I hate that, because then you're going to, but then if you come back again, then you're visibly behind everybody else. If you turn back to the left-hand side of the course, you're visibly behind somewhere else. Whereas if you sort of keep going towards the right, there is that sort of mental picture of, okay, well, maybe we'll get lucky here, we're clear air and that sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like, I hate saying it's like living in denial, right? I mean, it's just
yes,
things, and it's tough. I mean, sailing is kind of a tough, this, especially one design side of it, it's a tough thing because a lot of it is just realization of how to realize your losses and just kind of, stop the bleeding and kind of keep moving on sometimes, right? And it's like sometimes it's really hard, as you and I talked about, just putting stuff aside and not getting down or beating yourself up on your past decision and just kind of, figuring out how to keep moving forward. It's pretty funny, and everybody does that differently. Everybody's personality is differently. So, but yeah, it's a big part of it. Huge.
Yeah, that's great. That's great.
Yeah.
Let me ask you something. So, you're a very successful sailor, obviously. Why do you think you are successful?
Well, I do think that, I think for me, I would say I know I try very hard not to make the same mistakes over and over again. So maybe I beat myself up too bad when I do something wrong, but I think that's how I know that's just how I personally learn is, if I do something I wasn't happy with, replaying it over and over and over again. I try very hard to be repetitive on the stuff I do, which is, for me, it's like building habits and playbooks and things like that, so that, I like things to be more, as you were saying earlier, just stuff that I naturally do than having to overly think about. I think the one part about sailing for me personally is if I have to overthink it, usually it doesn't go very well. Like it's got to be something for me that success is usually when it just kind of feels natural. And I think a lot of that is just, spending time and doing stuff. And I think I sail a lot of different boats, which I think is very beneficial. I think you learn a lot of stuff from sailing different boats. You see a lot of different techniques. You meet a lot of different people. And I think that's one of the things. I think it's really easy to get kind of stuck on sailing one boat. You kind of get in a little bit of a rut type thing. And maybe you're plateauing on your gains of skills. And I think the more different boats you sail, it actually makes you a little bit better. So I know it's one thing I try very hard to do is sail on as many different boats as I can, because you can learn a ton. So, and I think keeping learning is a big thing. As soon as it becomes stale and you're not learning anything, I think you don't do better.
Yeah, there is so much to learn.
Yeah. Well, and I think the amazing thing is there's
quite daunting.
Yeah, it is, but I think that's what makes it fun. And I think it makes our sport kind of unique, is that you can always learn, and you can learn from people you don't necessarily think you would learn from, if that makes any sense. Like I mentioned before, there's so many boats you hop on, you sail on a Wednesday night, or you sail, honestly, even going with your buddies, you just go like throw the boat in the water and go grab beers. You're just going to cruise around on a Saturday. And it's funny, like if you're kind of paying attention, you'll be like, huh, look at that. Never thought of this before. Or never thought of this piece of rigging, or never thought of doing that way, or whatever. Like you can learn stuff from people all the time. It's kind of crazy. And I think if you watch people who are really good, they're pretty inquisitive about stuff, and then they kind of just put it in the bank for something to use later. So I think it's that's the cool part about the sport, I think.
Yeah, I think you're right. I've been lucky enough to talk to some very good sailors, and they do share that attribute of curiosity, inquisitiveness, thinking about things, trying to problem solve again and again and again. And there's an obsession about it,
Yeah.
which I think is really interesting. And of course, it means the sport is absolutely fascinating. And to your point, I've had people who've told me, "Oh, I was listening to such and such on your podcast, and this person who's talking to me is a very good sailor," and they'll say, I never realized he or she did that. That's really interesting. I pick people pick those things up from other sailors all the time, which is super
Yeah.
interesting. Um, Allan, this is terrific.
Cool.
Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us.
Anytime.
You have obviously you're a top sailor with a lot to share. So I'd love to do this again for part two.
Absolutely. Next time we're going to be at the yacht club, so I can get a bunch of beers out of you first.
That sounds terrific. Thank you very much.
No, thank you. Super fun.